All right, so now I don't want to get with that. Okay, so I'm going to tie this pattern I'm going to do today is called a tongue depressor. And a tongue depressor is, a medical instrument that uh, pushes your tongue out of the way when the doc looks down your throat and says, ah. And this is a bass fly. So it kind of is the shape of one of those long sticks, flat sticks that they use to depress your tongue to look at your throat. The intent is to have the body of the fly being fairly wide and flat, top and bottom. But we're using a material that has spiky bits that stick out the side. So instead of wrapping a single chenille around the hook, which sticks out all the way around the hook, what you do is just wrap the chenille around it, sticks up, and then you trim it so it's flat on the top and the bottom. This is a bass fly. And the tail, I think, is just for fun to have a tail. I don't think it does a whole lot. The materials to use, first is a mustad hook here. This is a long shank hook. It's I think you can see that. Is that reversed?
Well, that's a TMC.
Yeah, okay, TMC, yeah. So this is a 4X long, 3X heavy, and it's really long because we want to give that tongue depressor deal. And the material that I'm going to use for that is we put I think just for a little bit of trailing stuff, a bit of marabou and sort of matching color. The body material is this stuff, which is like a cactus chenille. And there's a variety of different ones you can use. You could use a little less skinny one than that, doesn't have as much sticks out the side in your body. Or you could use polar chenille, but I found the polar chenille, the bits that stick out the side were way too long. So I settled for this cactus chenille. And you can use it in different colors. This is a lighter colored cactus chenille. This one's in purple. And depending on how much the sticky out parts of the cactus chenille are, gives you a different width on the body. So I got one that's kind of a medium width. So the first thing we do is we debarb the hook. Of course, this saves you from having trouble with the fisheries guy when he comes to check. And I put the hook into the vise. And I have this nice pair of flat pliers. Every fly tire should have one that has a flat jaw with no serrations on it. And that's what helps debarb without damaging the shank of the hook. For this pattern, what's really nice about it is I'm going to bend the front 1/3 of the hook down. And the purpose of that is so that when you put the weight on the front end, it's going to cause the hook to be fished upside down. And it will also cause the hook to undulate a little bit when it's retrieved. So I come in on the hook where the back edge of the pliers is about 1/3 of the shank down from the eye. And I'll take and bend the front of the hook down. It's not quite enough there. And you
don't use 2 pliers?
My vise is pretty strong. And I don't want a kink in the hook so much as I just want to bend. So you can see it's bent down so that the eye is just about on the center of the bend of the hook. Okay, now the first thing is you want to coat the shank of the hook with tying thread. And I'm using a 3/0 floss. And this one is a color that kind of matches the color of the body material. I don't want necessarily a different color body showing through the chenille.
Mm.
You could, I guess, do that if you want. This just happened to be a relatively close color match to the material I want to use. So I do that. And the reason I coated the shank of the hook is that I want the material that I'm going to apply to help give that shape to be on the side of the hook. So I start at the front, and I've got some 0.020 lead wire. It's regular round lead wire. And I'm going to lay it on the one of the first little piece on the near side of the hook with a little gap between the end of the wire, lead wire, and the eye of the hook, because I need to finish ahead. And I'm going to put that wire on the near side of the hook shank. And I'm going to wrap that down to where the bend is. Then I'll pinch it off. I think I can get my fingers in there. I pinch it off. And to make sure it's on the side, I'm going to take my pliers and make sure it's on the near side. Bring my thread back down, and I'm going to put another piece on the far side of the hook shank, starting that little bit behind the eye. And I will wrap that down to where I pinch the other thread off, pinch that off. And again, I'll wrap over that with the thread. And I'll make sure that I have the lead wire on the sides of each side of the hook so that I have you can see it's a flat body.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole idea with this pattern, is to create a flat body.
Mm-hmm.
So the next thing I'm going to do is I've got some to create the rest of the flat body. I have some 40-pound maximum mono, and I'm going to take that right where the lead ended, and I'm going to wrap it on the near side of the hook. And the easiest way to do that is when I get it started with a couple of wraps, is to hold the mono at 90 degrees to the hook, away from the hook, and then let your thread pull it into the side of the hook.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to run that all the way down to the bend. And trim it off. Then thread back up to where the lead was and do it on the opposite side. And make sure it's on the side again. Get a few wraps and then hold it out to the side so that when I wrap down, it pulls the mono into the side of the hook shank. Get back to the back end. I'll trim the mono off. And get my pliers to make sure that all of the mono is on the sides of the hook shank. So that creates, you can see, a bit of width to the body.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes in handy when you're starting to do the chenille. Now for the tail, I'm just going to take a whole whack of marabou off a plume like that. And I'm going to measure it to about the lower 3/4 of the hook shank. And I'm going to tie that in right at the back end.
Is it tied on the flat portion or behind the flat
It's
portion?
tied on the shank right behind the flat portion. And I'm just going to cut off the excess here. I'll make a little transition here when I finish wrapping the thread. And I'm going to go under the back of the marabou just and pull forward a little bit as I wrap it. And what that'll do is that will keep the marabou up from the hook shank so it doesn't wrap around the bend of the hook. So that causes that marabou to stand up from the bend of the shank of the hook, so it doesn't wrap around the point of the hook, the bend of the hook. Then we take my crystal chenille, and I'm going to double it up before I wrap it forward. So I need to know how much to double it up. So I've done a couple of experiments, and I know that if I measure from the eye of the hook to the back of my vise, I'm going to have roughly the right amount. Use a little bit of chenille, this pattern. So then I'm going to take that and tie it right in where the tail is, like that. Then I'm going to take and fold it in half and bring the other end of that piece of chenille up. And I'm going to tie that down to the hook shank, right at the back. Then I'll take my thread all the way up the hook shank, and I will half hitch it off at the eye. Bring my bobbin holder up and set my bobbin in there. And what I have now is a, you could use a pair of hackle pliers, but I'm going to use these little hackle plier clips. And I'm going to grab it with the tip of that at the fold point.
Okay.
Take this out and I will spin that chenille up like mad until it all sticks out to the side.
Mhm.
Now I can wrap that up the shank of the hook. And sort of touching turns, so it's nice compact body. And you have to play around a little bit because when you hit the bent shank, it's going to want to go a little bit different direction. And you see I managed to pick just about the right amount of chenille. When I get to there, there's a little trick I learned from the website of the guy who developed this pattern. One of the problems you might have when you're tying off this chenille is if you don't wrap around a couple of wraps around the doubled up chenille, sometimes when you tie it off, it will unspiral on you. So going a couple of wraps around and then trimming off means that your thread doesn't end up on the floor and the chenille doesn't unwrap on it. And then once I'm there, I'll build a little bit of a head right behind the eye of the hook so that there's no place for the leader to get lost in the finish around the eye. And then I'll whip finish. So this is a really quick pattern to do, to this point anyway. And then the fun begins. So I'm going to trim off the thread. Now I've got two pairs of scissors. I got ones that are straight. These are the nice Mark Pettyjohn scissors. And I have another pair that are curved. So what I do first is I take my finger, wet it a little bit, and pack down on top of the hook shank so that I've flattened it out a bit. I'm going to take my curved scissors and I'm going to go right down the top of the hook shank, trimming off the sticky out parts. And the nice thing about the curved scissors is when I get to the tail, I'm far less likely to trim the tail off by accident. So what I'm trying to do is trim off the top of the hook, all of the sticky out chenille, that's the glistening part. I want to trim right down to the fuzz of the fuzzy part of the chenille and get that tail out of the way so I don't trim it off. So I trim that fairly short. On the top. I'll take my flat scissors now that I've got that, and I'm going to trim right across the top, right down to the fuzz part of the chenille. And then I'm going to take the square ones and trim it sideways all the way down, back. Keep that tail out of the way so I don't trim it off. And trim that back the other way. Then I turn them over, and I'll do the same thing from the bottom. I'll trim nice and tight to the fuzz part of the chenille, taking all the glistening parts off. Get the tail out of the way so I don't trim it. And once again, I take the straight scissors and take them crosswise and trim nice and tight to the chenille. The whole idea is to leave the parts that stick the furthest out from the chenille body on the sides of the hook, on the pattern, not on, leave them sticking out to the side, but trimmed nice and flat on top and bottom. So this takes a little bit of fiddling around. But when you get it done, you can see that it sticks out on the sides, but it's nice and flat top and bottom. So this is the thumb depressor. You know, thin top to bottom and flat on the sides. But the sticky out parts are what causes it to gather air and stuff like that, and gives it some wiggle. So that's pretty much it. It's fairly straightforward and easy to tie. And if you pay attention to the couple of little caveats on what not to trim off and what you leave behind, and don't trim your tail off while you're doing it.
How do you fish it, Dave?
You fish it on I would use a non-slip loop on this through the eye of the hook. So it gives the opportunity for it to do this when you're retrieving. And I, a fairly decent leader. You're fishing for bass, so you want a reasonably stiff leader. But a non-slip loop would allow it to do a little more wiggling around. And just cast it out, probably with type 3 sink if you're fishing for bass. You want it reasonably shallow. You want it to go down deep. And just do short strips on the way back in.
Thank you.
And that's pretty much him. So we'll see if I can figure out how to stop highlight here.
Yeah, on your point earlier that it may not need a tail, I think that tail is one of the juiciest part of the fly, because as it's the way you weighted it, it's gonna swim like a jig.
It's gonna swing up and down and side to side if you use a non-slip loop.
And the tail is gonna undulate in the water, so I think that's gonna be quite a feature.
Now, according to the website that I got this from, this is a very effective bass fly in the States. So I'm presuming that it would work here at Elk Lake.
Yeah, I don't know if Canadian bass are pickier or not.
Anyway, I thought it was kind of interesting having the kink in the shaft. I think is going to add to that vertical motion, because every time you tug it, it's going to bring that front end up, and then that lead is going to sink it down again. So I think it'll have a lot of this kind of motion to it, as long as you're not stripping it in, like, there's no tomorrow.
You can probably troll this thing as well,
Yeah,
as long as especially if you're rowing,
yeah.
because that'll give it a jerky motion rather than the smooth continuous motion you get with a motor. But
Now, another important tool for tying this pattern is this, because the speckled parts end up on the floor. And I could put an apron underneath, or my little catch bin. Let me say, my little catch bin is a little too short. It doesn't stick out far enough in front to catch the entire front of the fly. So I have to do a little housekeeping afterwards. So there you go. Now my lint roller is all sparkly.
yeah,
So that's him.
good. Well, then,
And like I say,
also-
I've done it with different chenilles in different colors. This is a skinnier chenille with not quite as much shiny parts. I think you could probably go through the chenille collection at Robinson's and find a couple of different ones that would work for you. And there you go.
sounds good.
Interested in giving it a go? We'll have to make
Yeah.
a trip to Elk Lake again.
Yeah,
I suspect it would work on trout as well.
well, as the water is cooling, we may be able to see some trout there as well.
Yeah.
I mean, those of us with fly lines and without downriggers. Yeah, so this is a fly I had some luck with at Elk Lake on the Bass. So, and I'm tying different variants of it. So the original fly that I only had one specimen of this, I think, and I was there one day and I wasn't getting much action, and I put the thing on, and then I was catching fish. I was doing weird stuff. I had a type 3 sinking line. I was trolling while rowing. Now, when I troll and row, I do make an effort to go reasonably slow. A lot slower than the guys on the lake who are training for whatever, winning gold medals. So you kind of have to contain your inner Olympian if you're rowing for this kind of stuff.
Come on.
Sometimes the bass would hit it even if I was going a little faster, but slower is better as a rule. And so anyway, I was thinking that, the fluorescent yellow eyes give a really strong hot spot. You can see this fly as you retrieve it, and it gets closer to the water, even if it's a little deeper. You know exactly where your fly is for a ways away when the water is clear. So that's, I think, a pretty good feature on some days, and depending on the water conditions. I thought that the gold should work as well. I don't see any reason why not, but it's untested as yet. And then I've just been using different combinations of pheasant body feathers, which come in quite a variety. And on some versions of this fly, I tie them in the round with a wet style hackle. And in some cases, so this is from a single feather. I use the tip of the feather for the tail, and then the rest of the feather for the wraparound wing. So that's like a big wet fly hackle. So these are, you know, I guess variations more or less on the idea of a carry special. Just using slightly different colors and materials, right? So there is nothing really fundamentally new here. Hook wise, again, it's kind of crazy. I was looking at hooks, trying to choose a hook, and I have some barbless hooks which are pretty nice. They're nominally size 10s. Then I went into my old collection of hooks, and I was looking at a Mustad 9671 right here. Now that one is labeled size 8, so this is what used to be a size 8. Now it's called a size 10. Now notice the newer hook here is a wider gap hook, so that may be an advantage for the bass. So use whatever hook you feel comfortable with and you like. This is not a very big fly, so you know, try to keep it to a reasonable size. I've tried bigger flies for the bass, and they did seem to I don't know, simply because I was going after the more numerous smaller fish or what, but they did seem to be more willing to take smaller flies than the big stuff, and that applied to streamers too. Okay, so put some thread on the hook, and then pick some material for a tail. Pheasant tail is a nice thing to work with here, so I'm just going to get a little bit of pheasant tail. It just gives that nice reddish brown color for the tail, you know, just not too much, kind of comparable to what you do on a pheasant tail, maybe a little bit more. I'll measure it about half the shank length, maybe a little longer. Secure. And then to get a smooth body, just continue wrapping forward over the remaining pheasant tail fibers. That'll give you an underbody, and when you put the shiny stuff on top, it's not going to give you ugly bumps. Okay. So now start with the tinsel. So this is dollar store tinsel that I found last year, and I spooled it on an old spool of thread that was empty. I saved those for this purpose, and it just makes my life a lot easier when maneuvering this kind of material. So wrap over this to the point where you tied in the tail. There we go. And then bring the thread forward. And again, I'm going to use the rotary vise, but I'm just letting the thread hang down here. It's just going to put a few more wraps of thread on the front of the hook shank. It's not a problem. So here at the tail end, just make sure that you cover up. There's usually a little bit of, you can see it here, the thread on the underside from where you tied on the tail. So I always make an extra wrap here, make sure that that's properly covered, keep the tension on so that this one ends up lying nice and flat on the hook shank. You'll see the bobbin will probably come into the field of view pretty soon. So keep going. Try to get a nice and smooth body here. Okay, there we are. couple of turns of thread to catch the tinsel, and then another turn or so in front. And now I'm using these electronics pliers, which, as I was explaining earlier, cut very close down and flush. So I don't want to press them down to cut my thread. So I'm just going to try to be careful here. If I cut my thread, well, I have myself to blame. So there you are. Tidy up over the little bit of stub that I had there. And now I'm going to choose something for the front. I've shown you two versions. One had a wing and a throat. The other way of doing this thing is to do a wet style hackle. So I'm looking here for some suitable feather. I have a little bag of cleaned up pheasant body feathers. I'm just gonna pick something up from here, see something that looks kind of nice and enticing for this pattern. If I want very long fibers, I have that choice too. So let's see. Maybe this one looks, it has a few ragged ends, but not a big deal. There's plenty of feather here to tie with. So pull the fibers back a little bit. So I'm going to tie this particular fly, I'm going to tie in the round. So catch the feather in by the tip, and then after I put in the first turn of thread, just pull back a little bit. So I end up with a little bit of distance, which will allow me to do a full turn before the fibers begin to flare out. Okay, and then secure that properly by going over the feather of the feather of the tip, the tip of the feather, I was going to say, with your thread, and then trim that. Okay. Clean up, I don't want to have too much junk here. And I left myself about 2 eye widths of space. And I'm going to leave the thread a little bit back, not all the way in the front, because I'm going to do tightly packed turns here of the feather. Now this is a pretty big feather. I don't really need hackle pliers, but it still makes handling the feather a lot easier. And today I forgot to bring my little pot of water here to wet this feather properly. So there you go. You need to moisten this a little bit in order to be able to fold the fibers back. It's always better if you do that. Then you start wrapping. And as you do that, just make sure that things don't cross over or get ugly in any sort of way. So just kind of keep control over things. If you have a rotary vise, you can also use that. But then again, you do have to keep an eye for keeping these fibers folded back nice and neat. So here we are, 2 turns. Almost 3. And then remember, while you're doing this, you have to remember all these things, right? So fold the fibers back. And then where the hackle pliers make life very, very easy is keep turning the stem of the feather so that your folded fibers are pointing back. And this is going to give you a very neat wrap. There we are. I think I've got enough. I don't want to overdress. It's probably a little overdressed. I'll do a few turns of thread here to catch the stem of the feather, then a couple more turns in front to secure this properly, and then go in there close and trim. Okay. Now, there may be stray fibers at this point. You can just pick them off by hand, or if they're in funny spots, use a tool. I'm gonna fold this back so I don't catch any fibers in the process, and I'm going to move my thread right back to the base of where I wrapped the feather. And now I'm gonna pick some eyes. I have some gold eyes, and I have somewhere some of these fluorescent yellow eyes. And I'm gonna do this one with the fluorescent yellow eyes. So here, it's really important to make sure that you've got the thread as far back as you can. So put this in place, put your first turn over, and then don't tighten on the downside. Tighten after you brought your thread back over so that your eyes don't roll down the shank. Then go under, cross over, and tighten down. And then start to do a few figure eights here. Make sure that your fibers are still, I like to just gather them together for this step so I can freely figure eight my way around the eyes. You want to do enough tension from the very beginning on this, and you're building up a little bit of thread here as well. You want to do enough tension from the very beginning so that your eyes don't move anymore. Put a bit of head cement at the end just to be on the super safe side, but that's just extra insurance, really. Make sure everything is where you want it to be. Turns, and then just move the thread in front of the eyes for the whip finishing. And I'm gonna turn the fly sideways so I can see better. I can see the eye of the hook. And I'm going to whip finish. Now, when I'm doing the whip finishing here, I have to wiggle the whip finisher around a little bit so that the thread wraps land properly behind the eye of the hook, and I don't end up whip finishing and obstructing the eye of the hook when I do this. And Sally Hansen's to the rescue. I'm gonna get one little drop here. This is fairly liquidy, so it should run down, and you can see the next drop is sliding down the brush. I'm gonna just wait for it to come down. Come on. And then this is going to secure my eyes and lock in that feather, which is super locked in anyway. And that's it. Now I just have to let it dry. I didn't put any liquid there in the hook, so yeah, that's the fly. And as I said, cast short retrieves on a sinking line. Depending on the hook you're using, the eyes may or may not be able to flip the fly over. So if it's very heavy wire, this might actually fish eye side up, but being tied in the round, it really doesn't matter which side it fishes. When you're fishing weedy conditions and so on, then you may want to use a lighter wire hook maybe, and then you'll be sure of it turning over. So that's that. And I'm not 100% sure. I have to do more experiments if it's these eyes that are the key feature that get the fish to strike, or the whole combination. I should tie a few just with you know, the gold body and the pheasant, and drop the eyes and see if how well that works. And with this, we're done. You have 2 bass flies, tie some on, and go to elk lake before you have to drill holes in it.
Yeah. So that hackle technique is they call a spay hackle. And with the longer hackles like that, it's a spay. But if you do it with short little hackles, it's called a spider type hackle.
Mhm.
And those are really useful hackles for almost all wet flies.
Mhm.
They seem to breathe really nicely when you strip them. Casting and
They're
stripping.
they're very soft.
Yeah.
If you want a bit stiffer, you can use pheasant tail throughout. You
Yeah.
just put the wing on it. It still has pretty good movement, but it's a slightly different action. That model also works, so it's perfectly fine. Yeah, this one was a bit more of a big hackle kind of thing. And you have to select your feathers more and only use the very tips if you want to do a wet hackle. You know, you just fold the fibers back until you reach a point where you get the length that you want.